Hello there, you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. We're looking back at Celtic's 2-1 win against Hearts in Tynecastle in the midweek. Rio Hatate got the opening goal with an absolute thunderfuck of a finish from about 30 yards out. George's Jacky Marcus doubled the lead. And as you can hear, Chico James and Alan Morrison enjoyed that intro, so they're with me as always. Guys, how you doing?
Good.
Right.
Is Thunder fuck one notch up from Thunder Bastard, or how does that go on a ranking scale?
It's definitely the top. It's as
Oh, it
hard
is?
as you can
Okay.
hit the ball. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Wasn't aware
a
of that
sliding
scale.
scale though. Yeah. I believe
it's an algorithmic scale. Actually, it's quite a bit better.
That's right. It sounds exponential. It does.
Yeah, it's very well thought out as well. It's exactly the same way as you guys do your different measurements and different stats. I do the same with my measurements of how hard the boys can hit the ball.
And I have an unleashing to have here because you inspired me with your fanciness. Now I have to say, my wife has a thing for Kevin Costner, and I tried to convince her that this is my attempt to be him from JFK, to do some role playing, but she didn't buy it. So she says that's not a romantic Kevin Costner movie. So now I'm stuck with looking like a 50s FBI agent. So I have you to thank for all of this mess.
For the podcast listeners, James has just put on a nice pair of glasses for the first time. It's the first time I'm seeing you with your specs on. People are going to start calling you Specky now. Don't worry. What? It doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt me when people do that on YouTube.
Well, these are not actual glasses. These are the blue. What do you call them? Blue light glasses that you.
Yeah.
This is a referral directly from you. So this is why I got them, so I can stop having tired eyes all the time. So I'm going to take them off.
If we're gonna unpack all that, James, I think this could be a therapy session.
That's true. That's true.
Look, there are people in the comments starting to talk about the Celtic win from Wednesday night at Tynecastle. A very important win, it has to be said, that Celtic came out with, especially given the second half performance. Hearts missed a penalty. There was a lot going on. Alan, myself and yourself did a post-match reaction on the YouTube channel straight after the game. So, James, I'm interested to get your thoughts. I know you were watching that. So, what was your general thoughts on the performance last night?
Yeah, I was distracted during the first half with multiple things going on in my life. So I went back and rewatched the first half because I was kind of in and out and distracted. I watched that early this morning. So uneven, maybe, is the best way to very chaotic. Lot of sloppy passing, I would say. But given the circumstances of just kind of getting a bunch of dice and shaking them up and throwing them out on the field in certain ways, these guys have never really played together in this configuration of players. Job done. But a very interesting, different kind of performance. So some of the data I gave you the most interesting one I came across so far. So Y-Scout has a metric is basically average passes per possession. So if you looked at the game that we lost there in the first league game of the season, we averaged 6.39 passes per possession. And yesterday we only averaged 3.62 passes per possession. So that I think that's a proxy for kind of how ping-pongy the game was as far as transitions.
Yeah,
and
that was probably, to be fair, that was probably 7 in the first half and 1 in the second half.
Right. It got much worse in the second. But even when I rewatched the first half, I was even somebody like Hatate, the amount of times, kind of like you did that first game, Alan, he does something so brilliant. That's what emblazons in your brain. And then I went back and it's like, wow, I'm starting to count the ones and he's giving it away. And he's trying, like, it's creative giving away. It's not other than the one back pass that was kind of sloppy. Unfortunately, didn't turn into anything, but it's those kind of little details that you do get when you rewatch. So yeah, I would say that just based off of my half-assed watching the first time and then the response on social media that I saw after the game, I would say the first half didn't look as dominant as maybe the consensus seemed to be. I mean, okay, it was good, but not like, oh my God, we're completely steamrolling these guys. So that's basically my summary.
The first 10 minutes in particular was actually not good. at all.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
was very, very sloppy, and we give away a good few chances. But I would argue then the following 20, 25 minutes then was all Celtic pretty much once the goal went in. And then the last 5 minutes was, again, back to the sort of messy, sloppy, back and forth football that we've seen. I actually do agree on the Hatate one. I was watching him last night, especially when Celtic were under the cosh. And I'm not too sure, as exciting as he is and as brilliant as he's been for the two games that we've seen, I'm not too sure he's a player I want on the field when Celtic are up against it, because he is a risk taker all the time. Every pass seems to be an attempt to open up the opposition. And at times you're just wondering, take the 5-yard pass, keep the ball, don't give the possession away. And that was my feeling in the second half, especially with Hatate.
Yeah, well, it's his tendency to be a one-man press. He was pressing Craig Gordon when everyone else had fallen back into a shape. That was what was concerning me in the second half. He wasn't pressing in line with the team. There wasn't any obvious trigger to his pressing, and it wasn't in keeping with what was going on in the context of the game. And yeah, like last week on his debut, he gave away half of his first dozen passes, more actually. First dozen passes, it was about 50% success rate. He was almost keeping tabs with Devlin for fouls. So every time Hatate gave the ball away, Devlin conceded a foul. Hatate gave the ball away, Devlin conceded a foul. They were kind of having a bit of a race, I think, together there. So for one part, but yeah. So listen, he's a lot of upside to him in terms of very similar actually ORiley, but what I'm sure we'll come to in more detail. I hope we will anyway. In terms of low center of gravity, can turn very quickly, has actually decent upper body strength, great balance, which I love, and so is he, and does things, wants to do everything quickly, and that's the difference with playing against low blocks and so forth. Is when we were stuck in the first 10 minutes with Starfelt, Carter Vickers, Juranovic back to Starfelt, and all this nonsense. As soon as the ball goes to Hatate, it's going forward really quickly, and that doesn't allow the defense to settle, and that's really important.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to come across as if I'm complaining about Hatate, by the way, because I'm certainly not. He's a really exciting player. But what I'm saying is, with 15 minutes to go, I'm not sure he's the player that I want in my centre midfield. Maybe a more controlling presence than.
It's a wider topic.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. We're not going to get too deep into that. Let's talk about some of the more intricate details of the game from last night. So we spoke about ORiley in glowing terms after the game. Alan, this was a phenomenal debut, really, for a player coming up from League One. You had 8 chances created on the Sky report. What
so they
what
said.
did it turn out for you?
Yeah, I've only watched most of the first half back, so I've not captured the data for the whole game. But he goes. I mean, in the first 10 minutes, right? By the 10th minute, he'd won the ball back in his own half with a good recovery tackle in the defensive third. He'd won the ball high up the pitch, creating a chance for himself in their box. He'd pulled off one beautiful pack pass, taking out a load of players, and had a shot at goal all within the first 10 minutes. It was the 31st minute. He was the last Celtic player to give the ball away. He'd completed all of his passes by then. I'm up to about the 35th minute, and he's created at least 3 chances and a secondary assist. But more than that, right? I mean, that's brilliant for a kid on his debut. He's only 21. But more than that, it was just when you see him and the way he receives the ball, the balance, the head up, the first touch gets out of his feet, and he's already going forward. I love that. I mean, in fact, some of the way that he received the ball on the half turn, I even had a little hint of, that looks like Kenny Dalglish. Just the way he received the ball and looked after it and turned and was ready to go. I just thought, this is lovely. His balance, I love that. The assisting pass for Jacky Marcus was off his right foot, no hesitation. He's a left-footed player. I thought he looked. I mean, I don't often get carried away, but he really looks exciting.
You're smitten, aren't you, Alan?
I am. Smitten. I think he looks. I think he looks a right player. Just I know it's early days, and the kid was obviously cramping up at the end again. I think we should talk about that. But yeah, just not even the numbers, not even the number of creative passes he did, just the way he played, the way he receives the ball, the positions he took up, the space he found, his head up, his first touch, lovely, all of it. Yeah, really liked it.
Just as a sidebar, I was actually thinking about what players of the past that I would have loved to see in the flesh, and Kenny Dalglish is right up there as one of the players that if I could go back and watch what they were like, it would have been him. He would have been one of the silkiest players of his day. Another player that sort of shone last night was Georgios Jacky Marcus, starting up front again, got his goal, which is most important. Alan or James, myself and Alan were talking about Jacky Marcus after the game, and it was sort of a consensus in a way that this was a fairly complete performance from a center forward who is definitely stronger in the box. Definitely, if you get the ball into him, he will get the ball on target. But he did a lot of work as well as that. He did a lot of defensive work and linked the play up quite well as well.
Yeah, I think that was as far as games where his skill set will align with helping the cause, I think that was probably a pretty good one, given the the amount of aerial balls, the kind of ping ponging that goes on at Tynecastle pretty regularly when we go there. It's just just that little bit of different style of a match because of the pitch dimensions and how they play. So I thought he was good and productive in that context. To Alan's point, relative to Hatate, I mean, I think we saw the disparity in pressing effectiveness just generally with the personnel that were available. And it's not a fair comparison because you're comparing him to two mutants in a good way, meaning Maeda and Kyogo. That scale of what they do in defending from the front is just, it's incomparable to a degree. So he's not going to give you that. But I thought he was functional. He was good, and it was a hell of a finish. I mean, really, really great finish. And that's, if you look at his shot map from his time in his career, that's what he's good at, is getting in those zones, central, and finishing. So I think, that's the way he's going to create value and offer value. Now, how much that's going to be worth against different kinds of opponents, I have questions about that still, but I think he could be useful in kind of a situational. And at this point, we don't have anyone else to play there, so it's good that it's good that he was productive when we need him.
Exactly. A couple of comments coming in on the YouTube channel already. Kevin14 says GG versus Kyogo, not as mobile but more clinical, which that is a fair point as well from Kevin. Rob McEwen is saying congrats, 10 minutes in and no mention of skills. Don't worry, that's coming. That's coming later on the show, Rob. Don't worry. We'll have our own section, the skills section, as it's starting to be known as. The clinicalness of Jacky Marcus is an interesting one that Kevin does bring up there, though, because Celtic have been sort of lacking in that killer edge, I guess. They're creating loads of chances. We've seen with their XG is pretty much off the scale as well, so they're good chances, but you often see Celtic coming away with just 2 goals from a game. So if you're looking at Kyogo coming back from injury, is Jacky Marcus an option to play with Kyogo so you can have that balance of clinicalness in the box while also having the pressing of Kyogo, or is it just a matter of this is going to be one or the other?
I think it's too short of a sample size to be making those kinds of declarations. If you look at Jacky Marcus's history preceding Celtic in mass, he's kind of under performed his XG. So, again, there's all kinds of discussion about mean reversion that goes on with XG, depending on the model, that kind of thing. But so he could be due for positive reversion. That would be the optimist view of it. But I don't think that and that's over a pretty big sample size. I mean, that's over 10,000 minutes of game time. So, I would say that it doesn't rule out that he's a better than average finisher, but probably it's less likely, I would say, given that size of sample and that he's kind of just been right around his his goal tally relative to his XG, which is normal. Again, that's not a criticism. That's why, XG usually does mean revert for most players. So, and Kyoko has basically been similar. Actually, I think he's a little above. So it's not a huge disparity with his track record too. So it's sequencing, it's sample size. So I don't think that would be, at least for me, analytically, that would not be a priority as far as why you would insert him along with, particularly given the topic of the issue of cohesiveness relative to pressing. Once we have Maeda and Kyoko, I think that's the combo I'm waiting to see.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the squad now is so spread out that it's one of these intangible things. But if you look at the players who are out injured, the players who are coming in to replace them are putting a real competitive edge to the squad selection. So if you take the midfield, for example, if ORiley continues on the form that he started with, then he's putting Rogic under serious pressure when he comes back from international duty. Likewise with Hatate, I think Turnbull, when he comes back, will be really struggling to put Hatate out of the team at that point. With Jacky Marcus playing up front, if he continues to score, do you just drop him straight away when Kyogo's back fit? There are a number of key players in key positions who have stepped up in this period when we've needed them, that it might bring an added bit of competitiveness, which could lead to better performances from the players who are coming back into the squad, Alan.
Yeah, so I mean, the midfield, as I said before, was the area I was most concerned about. So we've gone out and we've recruited 3 midfielders in this window, and with recruitment, right, it's kind of hit and miss. If even half the people that you sign turn out to add value to the first team, that's probably a reasonable hit rate for most clubs. But actually, I would hesitate to say we're not anywhere near 900 minutes for any of them, but they all look at least like they're going to be a good fit for the way we're trying to play. So that's a good start, right? I'll reserve judgment on absolute judgment until we get more minutes under the belts for all of them. But it looks coherent. They fit into the system and they fit into the style of play. And as you say, it could all have gone absolutely horrendous, having to rely on players that haven't had many minutes and throwing them in all at once as well, especially a place like Tynecastle. So we got a bit of positive variance last night at the penalty miss, right? There was probably maybe 2 offside goals, both theirs and possibly Jacky Marcus's. It's very difficult to tell with his one. Is his head slightly ahead of Suter's foot? I don't know. So we came out on the right side of that and deserved it on the first half. My concern would be within the midfield still, young players, Hatate, and Hatate's not that young. He's not that experienced because he went through the usual sort of Japanese cycle of university. So started his professional career relatively late. This is a big step up, as we saw for ORiley. He was cramping up. League One's pretty rambunctious, but the SPFL is considerably faster even than that. So and we could see that we were losing our shape a bit in the second half. So we still need that depth. There's still an awful lot of risk around, but hey, it looks like a lot of the players that we've brought in are working out, and that's great news.
Yeah. Again, though, despite bringing in those players, we still ended up near Beaton playing as the number 6 last night. Look, he actually had a fine game. He was actually playing quite good, but I still found myself cursing him come the final 10 minutes when he seemed to be doing all that he could to get sent off. And I was worried that, Ange wasn't going to make the substitute on time, that he was going to end up doing something silly. And he was 1 foul away from getting that second yellow. He really was after that deliberate handball. So, James, is Beaton, or did he show enough as a number 6 that you're not going to be worried about him despite the, headlessness that he can bring to the games at times?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the main issue. As long as he doesn't lose his head, he's very productive when he plays in a different way than McGregor, but productive nonetheless. So, yeah, he just seems to maybe have a bit of a I don't know if it's a temper issue or what, but I think he got a pretty nasty tackle. He received one not too long before he also started to kind of cascade there at the end. So that, and we've seen that whether it was Midtjylland or You know, he kind of lost his head in that game too with some nonsense. So that's the kind of thing teams will target, to wind guys up and push them to try and get them to make silly mental mistakes. So, you know, that's the big question. I think as long as he can not do that, I think he has a lot of value to offer, actually. And I think one big way is that he is more of a defensive force in that role than McGregor. So he's probably not as good spatially and creating angles to receive, you know, balls and build up, but I mean, he is a pretty good weapon as far as intercepting and winning tackles and cutting off passing lanes. So, and he's a really good passer too. I mean, that's the other thing. He really can create opportunities for teammates and move the ball along break lines, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah, another red card against Rangers as well. The idiotic, you know, just moment of madness. And you'd probably excuse it if it was a 21, 22-year-old player, but he's not young. Like he should have the mental awareness not to do these silly things. And I just couldn't believe when he stuck the hand out for that, and him already on a booking. I thought for sure that Beaton was going to send him off, but thankfully he didn't. He played on. I did think that in the final 10 minutes, the game was screaming out for Cal McGregor and the ability to control the pace of the game in the way that Beaton doesn't bring. That's what I view Beaton as, a better defensively, but just not a controlling figure when it comes to the possession. Alan, as we move back towards the defense, I know you haven't collected your data for the full thing, but Starfelt again is going to be someone that keeps coming up because it's just, you know, one side has their opinion, the other side has the other opinion. But what does the data say? What does Starfelt's numbers say about his performance from last night in terms of his duels anyway?
Yep, so it's pretty much a normal kind of Starfelt performance. I mean, I'm only, again, 35 minutes in, sort of thing. So he's like 7-1, 4 lost, sort of thing. It's just not enough. You've got to be 80% plus for these sort of things. You can't be like twice in the first half. And this is a point in the game where Celtic are dominating in the sense that there's no danger in the game. Hearts can't string two passes together. They create nothing after the first few seconds when Mackay had that long shot. And yet, you know, there's some dangerous situations created because Starfelt's under the ball. He's been either taken under the ball because he's trying to win something he can't, or Boyce has, you know, roughed him up a bit and taken him under the ball, physically moved him around, and you know, and it just happens over and over and over again. He tries very hard and tries to be really aggressive on the ground, which is great. But again, you know, you can't win the ball all the time. Sometimes you just have to slow the player up and let the rest of the defense regroup around you. You know, I've gone on about it now. I'm kind of boring myself, right? I've written about it. It's on the site. It's very clear. These metrics that I collect, you know, I believe they stand the test of time. If you look at that chart of centre backs, it all matches the eye test, right? And he's nowhere near good enough for what we need. And I'm sorry, and I know that's disappointing for some people. I don't want to say that. I want him to be good. I want him to succeed. But if you look at the data consistently, we're not talking about, you know, the guy playing 10 games here now. We're talking about 30 games, over 30 games. We've played European games. We've played low teams in lower leagues. We've played cup finals, right? And this is what the data says. It's just if you look at some of the most disappointing centre backs we've had, he's in that group. He's nowhere near Carter Vickers.
James, one of the talking points coming into this game was Suter for Hearts, because obviously he's off at the end of the season. People are wondering whether he is going to be fully committed to Hearts, and he was very strong, I felt, despite conceding 2 goals. And he has been a consistent performer. When you're doing your benchmarks for the exam, let's say for Starfelt, where does he come in Scottish terms, in terms of the SPFL? Where does Starfelt come in terms of his data?
Yeah, so it's lumpy. So his generally speaking, as you might think, aerially he's really poor, as Alan has talked about, meaning like bottom 20% kind of poor. And he's kind of middling as far as overall defensive value, which again, for a Celtic player, you know, if you're this is the way I think of it, is if you're performing around average for an SPFL level player at Celtic, that's not good enough. And you know, his passing is, as we've talked about, is very efficient and safe, but doesn't really produce much. So there's some value in not giving the ball over, but you know, I would say for the most part, he slows build-up play down, and you know, he's not much of a threat as far as carrying the ball and breaking lines. I would say Suter's probably not a whole lot different from a defensive profile perspective. Look better in the air. I mean, again, it's hard to be worse in the SPFL, but what Suter has is a little bit more of that athleticism, ball carrying, and a little bit more passing that Starfelt doesn't. So, you know, I actually think from a, you know, I don't want to say this, but I think it's probably a decent signing for Rangers, given the available stock of players in the league, and they're probably not paying much for him, if nothing, if they don't end up, if they can
help it.
Yeah, if they can help it, right. So, you know, he looks like a pretty solid, you know, league level, and I think the question for him is how he can do stepping up into Europe. So we've seen what Starfelt could do in Europe, and not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say for balance, then Cameron Carter-Vickers, despite it being offside, Carter-Vickers is the player that is behind the line. He doesn't get up quick enough for that goal last night. Outside of that, was this a normal Cameron Carter-Vickers performance, or was this a poor performance in the numbers?
I have the game numbers in it, you know, at least in the Y-Scout data. I mean, it was almost right on average, like across the board. Everything was pretty much right in line, and that's he's a very consistent performer. But I would say that where he has had more issues is in the box with those kind of runners. You know, those, you know, we've generally had those issues with low crosses on the ground. And those can be difficult generally. So, you know, again, as we've talked about, if that's the one thing that you're going to give up, probably not the worst, but yeah, kind of typical Carter-Vickers performance generally from a statistics perspective.
Yeah. Who has a violin playing in the background? If we get popped on YouTube for copyright infringement, I'm blaming you.
It's sorry, it's my son's practicing his cello. There you go.
Cello.
Yeah. He's actually right on the other side of the house. It's incredible that I can't do much more about that, I'm afraid. I think all the doors are even closed. It's quite a powerful instrument, so the sound carries.
No, it's all good. I'm just saying, if we get popped for copyright, it's on you.
I'll tell him that he's got an audience and to sharpen up a bit.
No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah.
Look, it was 3 points against Hearts. It's a pressure game. Celtic come away with within 4 points of Rangers, still with a game to play just before the derby next week. So I don't want to be overly negative, but I just want to finish off on the performance review from the game. And I have to take it back to Greg Taylor left back, because I honestly do believe that while Starfelt has struggled, that it is down to a lack of quality beside him. I do not totally down to it, but I definitely do think it is a factor within Starfelt's performances that he just doesn't have a top quality left back beside him when he's playing. Even Juranovic, when he's playing there, that's not his real position, so you can't really count that. James, you have the data from the game. Greg Taylor, from what I watched, from what I seen, he gave the ball away a lot. He was out of position a lot, and generally he did struggle. He looked like a player out of his depth against Hearts.
Yeah, I would say not one of his better performances. I'm not sure about the description on out of position. That's hard to say, because they seem to be playing a very fluid style relative to the fullbacks, as far as, you know, even flipping sides of the field at the time. and they certainly both seem to be capable of doing that, at least from a control of possession perspective. So, but yeah, his passing was not as secure as it normally is. But again, that was within the context of a game that a lot of players had that issue. His creativity, he wasn't really getting beyond Jota as he has somewhat in the past. But again, that could be a plan. So it's hard to know contextually where the role was for him and Juranovic, because Juranovic didn't really get to the byline either. So it's not like, so they were inside a lot. They were playing that kind of inverted, almost pseudo midfielder role a lot. So it wasn't one of his best statistically. I'm not his hugest fan either. I continue to have concerns about his level of athleticism and pace, and with one of your rumored fanboy signings potentially going to the other side of the city here, and that's a concern for me because Starfelt and Taylor against elite pace is worrying in my view. So that continues to be my big issue. Is I think to a degree you're right, meaning that some of Starfelt's warts may be less exposed if he had more athleticism next to him. But as usual, I think Taylor's getting a lot out of what he has to work with.
Yeah. A lot of comments coming in on the YouTube channel. Sean Kelly saying, how can these guys criticize Hatate? I don't think any of us criticized.
Sure we were.
We just said that he, these are what the stats say about Hatate's performance from last night. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit subscribe if you're not subscribed to the channel, and leave a like as well to let more people see the video, and keep the comments coming as well. We'll try to get to some of them before we finish up. So I guess before we move on to the Dundee United game this weekend, James, your general thoughts in the second half and why Celtic failed to control it. Was it tiredness? Was it just lack of concentration? Was it poor choices, or was it all of the mentioned?
I think it was likely all the above. I think we hit a wall, it looked like, physically, somewhere between 55 and 60 minutes. And, as people get physically tired, a lot of times mental acuity goes with it. So we got really sloppy, and they made some substitutions that dialed up the pressure a little bit. They brought in a couple of Everton loanee players, or I guess Beningame is a permanent signing now. But
he's former Everton,
yeah,
and Sims is on loan from Everton at the minute.
Yeah, but Sims was a handful. I think he would be a handful for any, at least aerially, any center back pairing. So, yeah, it just became a very chaotic and crazy game in some ways. And I think a lot of that had to do with physical and mental fatigue. And I think Alan will maybe voice some opinions on substitution patterns again. But yeah, we went quite a ways with some very obviously tired players on the pitch.
Yeah, Alan, have you thought about this more since last night? The issue that seems to be arising.
Yeah, so actually, article coming out on the Celtic Way shortly, maybe even today, about this. So, I've been looking at Celtic's performance, first half versus second half, or even through the sort of minute segments of games. Because if you look at the actual goals conceded, we score 55% of our goals in the first half, 45% in the second half. The opposition scored 38% of their goals in the first half, 62% in the second half. So, that's not the best indicator, because we know goals are quite rare events in a low-scoring sport. So if we look at expected goals, which looks at all chances created, not just those that result in goals, it's actually a little bit more evenly spread. But what's interesting is that if you look at the trend lines, then the opposition's number of expected goals per minute, if you like, in each minute of the game is trending upwards as the game goes on, and Celtics is trending ever so slightly down. But what tends to happen is that the expected goals for us and the opponents tends to get very, very close midway through the second half, and then the last 10 minutes it widens again. So what that tells me is that we're not making our substitutions early enough, and again, which is what my eyes are telling me. We're making substitutions too late. We've got good players on the bench. I know there might be players that Postecoglou doesn't want or doesn't trust, but they're probably better than the opponent, right? So if you've got somebody like Hatate who's running all over the park, not breaking structure, or you've got ORiley who's out on his feet, can't run anymore, then take them off, because McCarthy might not give you anything, literally nothing from an attacking perspective, but it'll give you shape, it'll give you structure, it'll give you positional sense, and he'll win, and he'll break down tackles, and he'll win the ball. So get him on and see the game out, right? We got away with it last night. I mean, we made substitutions in the 85th and the 90th minute for players that should have been off 10, 15 minutes before that. If you look at packing stats, so number of pack passes across 90 minutes, Celtic's trend is we do less as the game goes on. The opponent does more. That both of those things are a function of tired bodies and tired minds. As James says, we're allowing the opponent into the game as it goes on. But again, same thing. In the last 10 minutes, it spikes again in Celtic's favour. We get control of the game, and it was the same last night. Once the subs came on, we saw out 6 minutes of added time, and the last 2 or 3 minutes, we saw out the last 10 minutes with virtually no issues at all, because we brought fresh legs on. And this is, to me, this is Postecoglou's big Achilles heel. He's not making substitutions early enough, and we're playing with tired players. They're getting injured, which is another risk that's manifest because of that. And there will be a game that we won't be able to see out. Even Alloa put Celtic under pressure because we didn't switch up quick enough. So that's my, as I say, article coming out about that. I was pleased that the data supported my bias on this one. So watch out for that one.
Yeah, it's like it is pretty common sense thinking, really, when you see Hearts bringing 5 players on in a momentum swing like a goal and a penalty. You're probably going to struggle if you keep the same players on the pitch, especially if they're like ORiley, who could barely move. But I do wonder if, because we kind of see this trend with managers who play high intensity football. For example, Klopp's first season with Liverpool, if somebody took a look back at that, was it similar to this with Celtic? And next season, will we see a different situation where Celtic are actually really dominant in the second half, because they're just fitter, they're just used to this system, they're used to playing at this high intensity, whereas like in everything that we've said this year, it's a transitional year. So I wonder, is this just transitional sort of wearing in to the Ange system, James?
I wouldn't doubt that potentially. And again, in fairness to Hatate and ORiley, they're literally just through the door. I mean, to a crazy degree with ORiley. So, I mean, that's just a really tough situation to be thrown into physically, to be playing a different way in a different system, and having a complete change of life in the last few weeks. So that's a lot. And enjoying the balmy January in Glasgow at the same time. So, so I've done a decent amount of looking at his track record all the way back to Australia, and I do remain concerned about the potential endemic aspect of this problem, and how much is a cultural issue versus how much is a analytical and information issue. Meaning that I think Ange to me has struck me at this point as a throwback kind of manager, not necessarily as a progressive modern manager in many ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, Brendan Rodgers for the most part was when he came to Celtic as well. But there's a lot of things in football, meaning that, why don't managers make subs in the first half if the game is screaming for it from a matchup and a tactical perspective? Some managers will, but the vast majority won't. Why? Well, because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Why? Don't want to embarrass a play. I mean, this is ridiculous. This cultural thing. These are adults. Tell them to suck it up. We're making this change because I screwed up with my setup. It's nothing personal. So I'm making the switch, right? So
there's an old school attitude.
Well, but
you think that's going to work with the guys who have on their phone at halftime?
Tough. That's what I would say, right? So I think generally adjustments and substitutions are probably slow in the game, and Ange looks like, at least so far, that he might even be on the outer edge of that. Particularly when you account for all these physical aspects that we've talked about. If anything, I would think just intuitively that would move the needle to like closer to 50, 55, 60 minutes, as opposed to the 80, 85, 90 minutes that we seem to be. And some of that, as we said, was initially because of squad depth and that kind of thing. And we were all kind of waiting to see if there would be significant changes once the depth improved. And some of that's been taken away from us now, obviously, because of renewed injuries. And in fairness, not really, ones that were probably related to fitness. So yeah, it's just probably going to continue to be a big question mark.
Yeah. As well as some concerns with the performance, there were also some really, promising things from last night. ORiley's performance definitely being one of them. Hatate's goal, absolutely phenomenal. Jota's performance that we haven't really mentioned at all. He was really, really good in the first half in particular. Before we move on to the Dundee United game, curious to get your guesses on what the XG might have been for Hatate's goal.
It will be 2%. I mean, he was not under pressure, and he had a free, sighted goal. The ball wasn't bouncing, but it was so far out. It'd be no more than about 2%.
Yeah,
I concur.
I saw people on Seltzer here discussing whether his or the Nakamura goal against Rangers was better, and it's not a competition for me. I mean, that Nakamura goal is like, come on. Yeah. Craig Gordon probably could have done something with the goal last night, whereas I just don't think you're getting to that Nakamura goal at all.
No.
Agreed.
The Dundee United game then, what are we looking at for this game? What are we thinking Ange is going to do with the team? Is it very much the exact same team as started against Hearts? Is that what we're going to see?
I guess so. I can't think. I'm trying to think who might be on the edge of coming back. So many bloody injuries to keep up with. I can't even remember who's all out.
God, Callum McGregor's face, by the way. I don't know if you saw the image of him waving to the fans. Jesus Christ, his face looked really, really sore.
I presume if his cheekbone was in bits, he would have had to have had surgery by now. I mean, there's not, I know that there was swelling, but it doesn't swell as much in that area like it would round a knee joint, for example, where you've got to wait for the swelling to go down before you can do anything. But with the face, normally if it's like a fractured socket or a cheekbone, they normally operate pretty quickly, I think. So the fact that he's not had an operation, and again, playing the amateur doctor here, it might be good news in the sense that it could just be badly bruised, and I'm sure he's in pain. It's a hell of a dunt. But I wouldn't I wouldn't gamble on his fitness, put it that way. If the worst that happens is we play the same 11, I said it before the game that I would have picked Abada over Forrest, Scales over Taylor, and I wouldn't have chucked ORiley in, and that was me being an old fart, really sort of risk averse, and I got that one wrong. But still, even on last night's showing, I still would make the case for having Abada and Scales over Taylor and Forrest. Just on form, I don't think Scales deserved to be dropped after Aloha, and I don't think Abada deserves to be dropped. So I would make those two changes if it was me.
Yeah, that's two interesting positions that I was going to actually bring up. James, where do you stand on the Abada Forrest debate? Because a lot of people frustrated by Forrest's output against Hearts in terms of his final ball, but defensively he adds a lot more to the game than Abada does.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. My issue with Forrest is more so just where he's at physically, and he looks a step slow, which obviously that's completely subjective, but that would certainly fit with someone who's his age and having returned from basically a year and a half off, or almost a year and a half off, which is just a tough time for somebody in his age curve to suffer that kind of injury. But you counterbalance that. I'm curious to see. I don't have a strong conviction one way or the other, to be honest. One of the things I am curious to see is relative to having, if you throw Abada into that mix, with ORiley and Hatate, that's a lot of people taking a lot of risk. And ORiley, not so much. He was very secure on the ball, but he does take risks. That's a lot of risk taking, and I love that. But it's a question of how much could be too much. And one thing Forrest is generally pretty secure on the ball. His decision making has been a little wonky so far upon his return. So that would be one question. Again, I'm not stating an argument one way or the other. It's just I'm curious to see how that works out. I will say that because of how big the pitch is at home and how, for the most part, United has come in and been fairly naive playing us this season, that might lend itself to Abada and using some of that open space and making those runs with his pace that, a guy like Hatate or ORiley could identify those valuable through balls or cross field passes, that kind of thing. So given that aspect, I'd probably lean towards Abada, but it's not a strong conviction.
Yeah, and looking at the league table, Dundee United are 7th in the table, but in goals scored, they've only scored 19 goals, which is actually the 3rd worst. I know Dundee themselves have 18. Livingston have also only scored 18, and then St. Johnson have only scored 11. So they're, if you take the joint third equation, they're Dundee are just above the worst teams in the league when it comes to the goals scored. So is this a game where you bring Skills in at left back and bring Ralston back in as well for a few minutes? I know Ralston might feel like he's been left out in the cold a little bit due to the fact that Juranovic is just playing phenomenal stuff at the minute.
Yeah, I don't think Postecoglou makes changes for the sake of it, so I would expect him to play the strongest team, frankly. It's a must win. It's another 3 points. So, you got to balance up things like, as I say, who's coming back and when are they going to come back? And I hope that they've got a plan, which may well go out the window when someone gets injured, but at least have a working starting position on which 5 substitutions, and we can use 5 subs, by the way, right? Which 5 subs we can use to kind of keep things fresh. So I would hope that level of planning goes on, and you might want, like you say, to keep some players like Ralston and even McCarthy, I guess, just keep them ticking over in terms of minutes on the pitch. So yeah, definitely. And can you get Julien on the pitch? Would be an interesting one. And actually, I am wondering in my head, would you actually pitch Julien in for this game and say, actually, you're not going to be, no one's going to be running away from you. They've got no one that's going to run away from you in their team. So pitch him in and get him 90 minutes or at least 70 minutes, 60 minutes under his belt, maybe. That was the only thing that would occur to me. Yeah,
I keep forgetting that Julien still plays for Celtic, to be honest. He's been out for so long.
It's just so difficult knowing how he's going to get minutes, really. That's the thing, isn't it? What if he comes on? If he came on, if he played 60 minutes on Saturday and did well, what would you do? Would you play him in the derby or not? Is that be a really difficult situation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I wondered, was the reason he didn't play against Alloa down to the plastic pitch and maybe not wanting to risk another injury coming straight back from the type of injury he had? So, we'll see what happens with Christopher Julien. He is a classy player when he is at his best. So let's see what he's like when he comes back from injury. Before we finish up, anything you just want to bring up before we move on and get to the Dundee United game before the derby next week?
No, let's go.
Oh, that's one thing for you. We were 3 things. We were on time. We finished up within the 15-minute mark, which is absolute record for us. And Celtic have 3 points on the table. That is impressive stuff on the Huddle Breakdown this week. James Allen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone who liked and commented on the video when we were live. Loads of comments coming through. Keep them coming after the video is off YouTube. If you want to get the YouTube video, it is on Breakdown Inc. That's where you can subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done so already, get notified every time a video goes live. The podcast is on Spotify, on iTunes, and everywhere you get your podcasts as well. We'll be back next week with a review of the Dundee United game, and we might do something ahead of the derby as well. Thanks for watching, folks. We'll chat to you later. Good luck.